Hi, and welcome back to yet another video. This is the 14th episode of the story about the time when Sasuke gives his sharingan eyes to Naruto on verge death in waves. Let's watch as Naruto Uzumaki, Uchiha takes world by storm. After you've finished watching, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. What seemed like an army of people walked out of the Konoha theater after the premiere of Koyuki Kaza on his latest move, and it wasn't Icha Paradise. Maki no went to work immediately after the mission was completed and had a finished version on the cutting room floor 6 weeks later. With a picture of Uzumaki Naruto on the posters, everybody in Konoha tried to get tickets for the first show, and that included his old classmates. Of course, being heirs of prestigious clans had its advantages, so they were all able to attend and sit in the balcony at the premiere. Who thought Naruto would be the knight in shining armor type? I mean, he dethroned a tyrant and saved the princess. Sort of. If only we knew back in the academy. A forehead. Yosh, Naruto-kun's youthfulness has increased greatly in the short time he's been gone. It's apparent I haven't been working hard enough. If I cannot get a noble woman to kiss me by the time he returns, I will run around the village until my legs give out, then I shall do it on my hands until my arms no longer support me. Everybody backed away from the spandex-clad teen except for a man that was wearing the same getup. Lee, you are filled to the brim with hot-blooded passion. Don't underestimate yourself, because it is you who are the shining example of youth. We should all strive to emulate you, for you are truly in the springtime of your youth. Guy looked around to see that they were the only people left on the once crowded street. Where did everybody go? Well, you know what this means, Lee. Laps around Konoha. The green-clad Jonan saluted his sensei, Asu. Now my pupil, explode. The two disappeared after reaffirming their sensei-student bond, only leaving behind dust outlines that were hugging in the abandoned street. For their sanity's sake, everybody had decided to ignore the green beasts and keep walking. Kuji had finished dumping an extra large bucket of popcorn into his gullet and popped open a fresh bag of chips. Since the rare moment came when his mouth wasn't chewing anything and nobody was talking, he took the opportunity to say, "The princess seemed to really take a shine to Naruto. What a lucky guy." Shikamaru sighed. "I don't envy him at all. Imagine having to deal with all those duties and responsibilities. That's way too much work for a woman, even if she wasn't troublesome. Although having servants waiting on your every need sounds perfect. Oh well, it's not like an uncool guy like me could get a princess. Ha, the brat is turning into a ladies' man just like his father. Although that almost got him killed by Kushina more times than I can count, even before they started dating." The Jonans' heads jerked in surprise after hearing the voice behind them, and Tenta nearly squealed with joy. "Why are you here, Tsunade-sama?" asked her more level-headed teammate. The blonde pointed her thumb to the side. "Well, I was going to wait for it to come out on video, but Shizune really wanted to see it." Everybody's sweat dropped because the brunette wasn't around and they couldn't find her. Not even Neiji's Byakugan could locate her. They all gave the medic a skeptical look and she coughed into her hand. "Well, it's not my job to keep track of a grown woman." She then made eye contact with her newest apprentice. "Don't forget, training starts tomorrow, Sakura. I hope you're ready." The pinkette gave a determined nod. "Of course, I am Tsunade Shisho." Tenten stared at the younger girl with jealousy. "That's so unfair. How did you manage that?" The legendary medic gave Sakura a proud look before recounting the story. Flashback: "This has got to be the worst excuse of a sling I've ever seen. How did any of you get licenses?" Tsunade stormed through the hospital in a rage. She had just returned from her mission with Shizune and it was her first day as head of the medical division. Well, the first day of her second term. The blonde was doing an inspection of the patients and she wasn't pleased, not one bit. Bandages and medical tape were loosely wrapped. One man had gauze on that was so old it merged with the scab, and plenty of other embarrassments that she would be surprised to see in a free clinic. The irate doctor stopped at one patient and lifted up his arm that was attached to and for, "Who placed this in here?" A brunette nurse timidly raised her hand and Tsunade's glare forced the frightened crowd to frantically scatter, revealing the cowering woman. "Did he call you fat? Or old maybe?" The woman could only meekly shake her head. "Then why does it look like a woodpecker got at his arm?" The slug summoner ignored the terrified nurse's babbling and thundered down the hallway as the rest of the staff scampered to keep up. Her sharp honey-brown eyes scanned over every patient they went by in seconds, until she stopped at a small section of beds. Who was tending these patients? The medics immediately separated again to reveal a familiar pink-haired teen. "You're the brat's little girlfriend, right?" Sakura blushed and weakly shook her head. "We're just teammates." Tsunade's lips turned upwards into a comforting smile. "Makes sense, better off playing the field at your age. But you can't be shy if you're going to hang around that little buffoon." The pinkette had a small grin on her face as Tsunade continued, I'm sorry to say this, Sakura, but I'm pulling you from the medical program." The girl's face dropped with disappointment while the other medics gasped, "Because I'm making you my apprentice." Emerald eyes widened in surprise and the girl stuttered, What? Why?" The blonde pointed towards the various patients, "Because you've impressed me. All of these are done textbook and I'd hate to leave your development up to chance, or these people." Before the girl could answer, Rin stormed through the crowd, "Hold on a damn minute. Sakura's great because I've been teaching her. Just because you're one of the Sanin doesn't mean you can steal my student." Honey eyes stared fiercely into cold chocolate once. "You're right, but being the best damn medic to ever exist should give me some leeway. And on top of that, I'm your boss." "You wish you were my boss. I work independently, answering directly to my contractor and the Hokage. You can't intimidate me like everybody else. Besides, you've been out of the game for over a decade. Maybe you should get yourself up to speed first before taking a student." Tsunade's eyes narrowed dangerously at the haughty woman and her voice carried enough authority to cow almost anyone, but not a student of the Yondaime Hokage. "Watch your tone. Last time I checked, Sarutobi gave me the position." Rin laughed derisively. "What's it feel like to be the second choice, Miss Senju?" Excuse me." The two looked over to Sakura, who had weakly interrupted. "Naruto trained with two people and I trained with Rin-sensei and Kaka-sensei too. Now he's just having us hone our existing skills, so I don't see why I can't learn under you both." The two kunoichi huffed and turned away from each other while simultaneously answering, "Fine." And flashback, Tsunade finished her narrative and looked around, "And that's how Sakura became my second apprentice, but I still want to know where my first one went." "She has the apartment key." Shizune was in a daze as she walked through town. The brunette had bought a large Naruto plushie and squeezed it tightly to her torso, the blonde spikes covering her blushing face. She needed some time alone to get control of herself. The usually demure medic had a dark fetish hidden from everybody, even her mentor. You see, a young pubescent boy was the only thing that sexually excited Shizune. She recalled one particularly arousing scene and managed to fight down a squeal while remembering how valiant and heroic the blonde looked, yet somehow managed to retain a youthful innocence and exuberance. A stinky, hairy, disgusting, smelly man that burps and farts and has all those other disgusting habits could never do that. The brunette sighed and squeezed the stuffed Chunin tighter. Her only regret was she didn't spend more time with Naruto before he grew up into one of those brutes. Of course that would probably happen again, just like the boy whose scrape she healed and then babysat until the mother came along. The woman would be lured in by his adorableness and snuggle her head into the top of his, coincidentally nestling him to her breasts, preferably in the middle of her cleavage. Then she'd start swinging side to side while rubbing him up and down her body, feeling how his small frame contoured into her curvy one perfectly. Then Shizune would begin caressing his hair, then neck, his back, tickle his sides, then his cute little legs, and before you knew it she'd be dry humping herself to orgasm on his leg. To this day Tsunade still wondered why Shizune woke her up from a drunken slumber to escape a small town and never return. Fortunately they were running from debt collectors, so her master never asked. It was a good thing too, because to this day the brunette still didn't know what to say. Orochimaru elegantly stepped out from a hatch in the earth before locating his chief spy and medic. The silver-haired teen was out gathering herbs for a poison, or so he said. The snake-like man stood with his back against a tree, and once the bespectacled shinobi walked past with a basket of herbs he said, "Enjoying the fresh air and sunlight, Kabuto-kun?" The unassuming boy froze in surprise before slowly turning with a smile. "It is a nice change from time to time. But what is it you require from me, Orochimaru-sama?" "I'm about to leave on some personal business before heading back to the main base for the body transfer. I want you to summon Kimimaro, the remaining sound trio, and have your puppet Renji fetch Guren for me." The snake summoner continued into the wilderness, but stopped before adding, almost as an afterthought, "Are you finished with Suigetsu-kun yet?" The medic smirked cruelly, "Oh, I forgot all about him. Yes, we've been done for quite some time. It's just, he keeps saying that he'll do terrible things to me after getting out, so I've kept him in the tank for my own safety." Orochimaru smirked, "Oh dear, then perhaps Renji should collect Suigetsu-kun and you can get Goren." Kabuto pushed his slipping glasses up and the sunlight reflected off of them. "It would be interesting to see if Renji's abilities are able to match up to the Hozuki clan's, but I'll stick with Suigetsu. Guren could actually kill me if I'm not careful." Ever since the movie about reclaiming Yuki no Kuni was released, Naruto had to change his appearance, but they discovered that nobody recognized Jiraiya, so he didn't have to. The blonde spotted a face mask like Kakashi's one day and used that to cover his whisker marks and started wearing plain black bandana with long ties in back to cover his sharingan. The shinobi hoped it was enough, But his outfit was quite popular too. Everywhere they went people saw a one-eyed blonde wearing it and put the pieces together, so he had to change that as well. The boy found a jumpsuit that was burnt orange from the legs up, except a black D that was on both sides of his torso, though 2 stripes of orange were on the side, and covered the tops of his arms and shoulders. Since nobody was around to hate on the greatest color ever, he had an Uzumaki seal stitched onto the back, in the middle of the T, and had several copies made. It had been just a little over 6 weeks since they left the land of snow and the two were in Umi no Kuni, sea country, to investigate rumors of a monster that was sinking ships. Jiraiya claimed his old teammate used to have a base in the area, so it was his responsibility to check things out. Naruto had finished training with Gamariki 10 days after leaving Yuki no Kuni, and they had taken up the study of Fuin Jutsu, which Naruto took to like only an Uzumaki could. Of course he had the inherent stubbornness of one too. Damn it, Uro-sennin, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Listen Brad, I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Then you've been doing it wrong. 2 charcoal eyes met a steely blue one and Jiraiya waved around a weathered scroll. See this gaki, it's one of the most respected discourses on barrier seals and you're telling me it's wrong. Jiraiya had been trying to explain the basics of creating a barrier to the blonde. One would create an array to channel chakra across before the edge curled up to form a bubble, wall, or whatever it was designed it to do. That was the most basic and important concept. From there you could increase the layers, change the composition to elemental, create a detection barrier. Just like everything else in Fuin Jutsu, the possibilities were literally endless. There was another way that involved creating broadcasters or antennae, as some people called them, but that involved more advanced knowledge. Then how would your expert ass pull it off? Because I know it wouldn't be your head? I'm glad you asked. Naruto grabbed a blank scroll and the ink jar next to his teacher and began fluently drawing. He created 2 concentric circles, then drew a set of seals inside the smaller one before inverting them and drawing the array outside the large circle. The Chunin held up his creation and began explaining, the reason that guy is stupid is because the size and strength are static with that seal. With this one you can adjust its strength and size to a degree. All I have to do is channel chakra into the seal and it flows up from the inner seal, then the outer array pulls the rising chakra towards it, creating the barrier. The chakra can only get so far away from the outer seals, so after that point the strength increases. I know it's not perfect but still better than that. The only thing that is static is the effect and shape of the seal. Jiraiya started grumbling after his student's explanation and began fishing around his vest. Once the man found the stitching for the right seal, he channeled chakra into it and a black, leather-bound book popped out with a puff of smoke. The sage tossed it to his student and Naruto was able to make out the name Namikaze Minato etched in gold letters at the bottom. He stared up at his teacher and the man smiled proudly. I thought something like this might happen, so I've kept that close. When I tried to teach your dad the more advanced stuff, he looked at it from a higher level and was able to see things I couldn't. He actually learned most of his stuff from Uzumaki Mito before she passed on. After her death she bequeathed the Uzumaki Fuin Jutsu scrolls in her possession to him as an early wedding present. Naruto stared at the man wide-eyed. He also learned some stuff from your mom too, but sealing wasn't really her forte. She'd always say her talents lay in the field of kicking. Naruto gave the book a teary smile as he rubbed the cover affectionately. The orphan was holding a link to his father, a peek into the man's brain. Jiraiya shivered and looked around quickly, but the boy was so absorbed in the book he didn't notice. The hermit rose and started walking out of the clearing after tossing a roll of bills by his student's feet. I'll let you read that in private. When you're hungry, get something in town, my treat. The Chunin nodded vacantly and pocketed the money before opening his book, forgetting the man usually took his money. Jiraiya went a good distance away before performing the sequence for Kushios no Jutsu, with one extra seal at the end. After slamming his bloody palm on the ground, a small cloud of smoke appeared. It dispersed and a small rotund toad that was a dull brick color with bright red markings and wore a blue vest stood there. The amphibian's voice was gruff and sounded quite grumpy, but there was an unmistakable whine buried in there. What do you want, Jiraiya? The salty air is drying out my skin and you know I hate being summoned in my small form. It reminds me how the other toadlets made fun of me for being chubby and warty. Calm down, Bunta. Hushed the sage. I think Orochimaru is in the area, so I want you to keep an eye on Naruto while I check things out. I'm going into town and renting a boat to visit this haunted island I've been hearing about. Bunta's eyes narrowed, which warped his scar, and he huffed. Fine, but only because I like the kid so much. And you owe me big time. I hate the ocean. Naruto finally opened the book after staring at it for several minutes and immediately began reading. Hello Naruto, Naruto's children, and hopefully Naruto's children's children and so on. My name is Namikaze Minato. I'm writing this book so my descendants can take advantage of the knowledge I've gained and add theirs for future generations. You'll notice that the last page is blank, but when you fill it up a new page will appear, so please add your techniques and skills. The book can only hold so many pages though, so when this is filled you can create another one with the guide I've placed inside. Also don't worry about messing up and ripping a page out, the book will form another blank one. But once the page is fully written it can never be removed, so write carefully. This book contains everything I've learned about seals that go beyond the basics. Fuuinjutsu is a diverse art that is only limited by the imagination. Naturally I could only focus on a couple of areas, namely barriers and space-time manipulation. I would also like to explain a theory for a side project I never really started because the flying Raijin took all of my time and focus. I once fought a rogue member of the Tsushigumo clan and he possessed the ability to project seals through the air without the use of paper. For years I thought they created them from pure chakra until my lovely, intelligent, and caring wife, who is not looking over my shoulder, called me an idiot and said they shaped the ink into the seal before projecting it. Despite being wrong, I was fascinated with the idea because of the potential, however it needed more time than I had to give. This is what I theorized. Fuuinjutsu at its core is using ink to channel chakra into a shape. The seal's creator uses the ink as a medium, like hand seals, to dictate where the chakra will go. Once the circuit is complete and the chakra density sufficient, the seal will activate and will react depending on how the chakra is being molded. I wanted to take the ink out of the equation completely and just mold my chakra into the seal. Despite not going anywhere, it helped lead to the Rasengan, and my ability to apply seals simply by making contact was a step I created to learn it. Naruto sat back to digest what he just read, and before the book absorbed him again the Chunin created some clones to brainstorm Rasengan ideas. Usually the blonde would have his copies go over books and scrolls, but he wanted to personally read this one. After the Bunshine went away to start thinking, Naruto fell back into the manuscript. The teen wasn't really learning anything about techniques, just trying to get a feel for his father through the writing. He lost track of time, and it wasn't until the clone group interrupted him that the boy realized it was well past noon and he was starving. The shinobi had an annoyed look as he stared up at his copies. "Why didn't you just dispel?" His Bunshine looked at each other nervously. "Well, it looked like you were really into the book, so we didn't want to disperse because it might not sink in. But we can dispel now." Naruto put the book down and grumbled, "Don't bother, if I think it needs more work I'll leave you guys here to keep thinking on it while I recharge." What appeared to be the spoke's clone nodded. "Okay, well, we went over all of our missions and figured out we need a good defensive jutsu, something like that's no Kunoichi's shield except not shitty. The Sensuguaki is cool for lightning and projectiles, but against anything else it's useless." The Chunin got up from under the tree and nodded. "Try creating it." The Bunshine all tried to form a flat version of the Rasengan, but it blew up in their faces and they dispelled. Naruto sighed and tried to decide if he should leave clones behind or work on it later, because the constant flashes of memories would be annoying. The teen's belly interrupted his thoughts and he vowed to get to it after lunch. Game Ubuntu followed quietly, but he couldn't fight down the bad feeling in his stomach. The toad hoped it was seasickness. He probably shouldn't have had that third helping of Ma's cooking. The room glowed yellow from the artificial lighting reflecting off the stack of 24-karat gold ingots. A short skinny man, a little over 5 feet tall, that had shoulder-length gray hair in a ponytail with a wide, buttoned-up Labon coat, stood in front of the stack. It was about twice the height of the scientist, and if he decided to lie down on the ground it would take 3 of him to approach the pile's length. The man could spend hours a day staring at the gold. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, almost erotic in a way. His mood was broken by the sound of slapping footsteps echoing in the underwater base, and the complaining of his pet. "I've done everything you asked me to, Amachi-sama. When are you going to change me back?" The man's beady eyes glinted with anger. "Shut up, you wench. My assistants never came, so the research has been slowed. I'll do it when the process is ready." Kukaku. Amachi would know that laugh if 100 years passed, and to him it felt like they had. However, the silky smooth voice that followed sent shivers down his spine. "That's no way to talk to the girl. It's not her fault those 2 incompetents died. Besides, Isarabi-chan might have willingly helped if you told her the truth." Unlike her tormentor, the girl was entranced by the shinobi's voice. "How do you know my name, sir?" The pale man stepped forward and gently slid his fingertip down the part in the middle of her hair. "I am aware of many things, child. For example, I know the process can never be reversed." Her charcoal eyes shot open before they stared accusingly at the scientist. However, the serpentine's comforting hand fell on the girl's shoulder. "But I didn't say it was hopeless. Amachi sent me a letter detailing the finished process and how he used it on himself. It doesn't look like he has scales to me." Well Amachi, do you have scales? NN no Orochimaru-sama. I don't have scales, stuttered the petrified man. The teen looked pleadingly at the snake summoner. Will it work on me? Orochimaru smiled at her. Unbeknownst to Amachi, the serum that he received so long ago was extracted from Juugo's glands. Isaribi was the result of an experiment to see what the nature chakra would do when not delivered through a seal. For years the subjects became mindless beasts, so Orochimaru lost interest and left. Amachi thought he was doing his master's bidding though and stayed behind. The scientists sent reports that were thrown away more often than not, but one day a letter came saying a subject retained their sanity. After that he became very interested. Isaribi was a diamond in the rough and the Nukenin loved glittery things. Of course I can, dear, however I would like to try something else first. If it doesn't work we can do it the other way. The half-transformed girl nodded meekly and Orochimaru's neck extended to deliver the Juujutsu and bit a patch of scales on her left shoulder while wondering if the placement had any effect. Isaribi gasped in fear, then pain, before falling to the ground unconscious like every other recipient. However, that's where the similarities ended. The seal expanded and covered her skin in a wave-like pattern while absorbing the scales. Once it wrapped around her body, the comatose girl was outlined in black chakra before it covered her completely and exploded outwards. She stood up, and when the malevolent energy finally died down, although it still leaked off her body, Isaribi stood there in Kaima form and tears started falling from her sickly yellow eye. Orochimaru stuck his hand through the vile chakra like it wasn't there and reassuringly patted her on the back. This doesn't feel like the second level of the seal, but there's still more energy than usual. Try powering down. It took almost 10 minutes, but the two scientists were patient and the black chakra eventually lessened before Isaribi was just covered in the wave-like markings with no scales. Remarkable, it was like level 1.5. Theorized the pale man. Isaribi stared at her body and rubbed the areas that used to have scales before prostrating in front of the man. Thank you so much, I don't know what to say. Oh, you don't have to say anything, but I can offer you more. Would you like to come with me? Come to a place where you will never be judged for who you are or what you were? Do you really think those people in the town will suddenly be accepting when you appear? Let me tell you something, Isaribi-chan. People love to point fingers, to hate. They need something and be scared of and to look down upon just to feel better about their miserable existence. The sealed girl lifted her head and smiled. Yes, Orochimaru-sama, I want to come with you. The serpentine man looked down upon her. Is there anything you would like to do before we leave? I doubt you'll ever be back. Isaribi's smile turned bloodthirsty. Well, now that you mention it. Is Amachi important to you, master? Kukaku, of course not, dear. Do what you will. The man fell to his butt and pushed backwards with his hands, so petrified he didn't think to activate his Kaima form and try to escape. You don't need to do this, Isaribi, I never really lied to you. I was trying to reverse the process, I didn't think you would want to complete it. His former experiment's yellow eyes held no pity, only eagerness as she launched forward. Orochimaru ignored the dying man's wails as his newest disciple tore him to shreds and just stared at the gold. Amachi was always a short-sighted fool, focusing on the goal for the goal's sake. The scientist could never see the big picture because of his hyperfocus. What good was knowledge if it was useless? Still, his desire is what allowed the boob to amass this fortune. It's a shame he wanted to waste it on this worthless project. The yellow-eyed man smirked and turned around when the shrieks stopped to see limbs and blood splattered across the walls and floors while the girl jumped on his broken torso. Well, it wasn't totally worthless. Is there anything else you'd like to do, child? Isaribi looked towards the mainland longingly and the snake smiled. Don't take too long, I'll get you when I'm finished. Or you can get me. The girl's step had that bounce it was missing for so long as she hopped through the opening into the sea. Naruto knew something was wrong almost as soon as he left the clearing. Smoke rose up in the distance, and shrieks of fear and pain reached him well before the town was visible. From his perch on a treetop, the Jinchuriki watched the villagers stampede through the narrow streets like cattle while parts of their town burned. They all seemed to be running away from a singular point that was clear of flames. The Chunin noted the location and sped toward it, jumping on rickety shacks to avoid the mob. What he came upon surprised him, and made him suspect Orochimaru really was involved. This had to be the sea monster Jiraiya came to investigate. It was about 6 inches taller than the blonde and covered in lime green scales. The beast's forearms bulged and short fins that extended down the backs of them. It also had a large dorsal fin in the middle of its head with 2 long ears that came down to its neck that looked like ponytails. Naruto guessed it was Aishi because of the dress, but after training with a cross-dressing toad he wasn't jumping to any conclusions. The blonde could feel the Kyuubi's chakra flaring because of the gruesome scene around him and pushed it down. Why are you slaughtering these people? What did they do to you? The creature sneered, revealing a mouth full of dangerously sharp teeth. "They deserve to die. I was treated like an outcast and shunned by everyone. Called a freak and a monster, now that I have the power to make them pay I will." The Jinchuriki let out a throaty growl. "You weren't a monster until your first victim, no matter what anybody said. Now you're just a beast. Shut up. What do you know?" Isaribi launched a ball of water at the Chunin that was easily 8 feet wide. Naruto hopped left and started running towards the creature while avoiding several smaller shots. The blonde cocked his fist back and the girl flinched in panic when he got close. The move was only supposed to be a feint, but the Chunin wasn't one to pass up an opening, so delivered a solid left cross to her chin. She rolled across the ground and regained her feet before facing down the charging shinobi. The creature leapt into the air and spread its claws to deliver vicious slashes. However, she left her torso wide open and Naruto shoulder-checked the beast before the deadly swipes made contact. Isaribi gasped as the wind was knocked out of her, but needle-like teeth pierced the Jinchuriki's neck in response. Her dangerous jaws weren't near anything vital and Naruto quickly jabbed the monster in the stomach before it could start thrashing. The creature opened its mouth again and the Chunin dropped before sweeping his opponent's web from underneath her. The mutant fell backwards before howling in pain when she bounced off the ground and Naruto's heel drove her back into it. The untrained girl slashed wildly at the Jinchuriki's calf, but he was able to pull his leg away and the sharp claws only nicked his skin. The blonde ignored the scratches and avoided more blasts of water as she regained her feet. "We don't have to do this. I know what it's like to be alone and hated, and I have a friend who gave in when he was younger. He turned his life around and so can you." Her yellow eyes stared hatefully at the boy. "No, you don't understand me. Stop saying that." The scaled mutant sent dozens of water bullets at the blonde and he was forced to take cover behind a sturdy building. Despite the raw power now in her possession, Isaribi knew there was no way to beat the kid. On land at least. Anger welled up inside of the creature as she looked around the town that ostracized her, but she shoved it down. The girl managed to figure out which direction the river was, but had no idea how to get the shinobi over there. She didn't know how to maneuver an opponent in the heat of battle, and the boy was too skilled to just run past. The sea monster's finned head turned after hearing some rubble move and a small group of 10 people ran across the street, in the direction of the water. She let out a triumphant howl and charged them while Naruto futilely called for her to stop. Isaribi's wickedly sharp claws easily disemboweled a middle-aged woman before she turned and ripped a chunk out of a child's torso that left his organs exposed. After the quick strike, the beast leapt away from the remaining citizens before the blonde got close. Naruto could only ignore the people's cries of pain as he gave chase, hoping he could stop this before more innocents were slaughtered. The transformed teenager's head turned to see the blonde had an angle to intercept her up ahead, however a trio of giant water balls launched towards a crowd of people slowed him down. The shinobi responded with a daitapa, but it only destroyed the one closest to him. The other two flattened the townspeople into the earth. Naruto fought down the hot tears as he forced chakra to his legs and exploded towards their killer. She saw him coming and adjusted her path to intercept a group of small kids that used to bully her. Isaribi hissed in glee as she raised her claws for some payback and the boys all huddled together. Blood sprayed through the air as the monster slashed her claws, but all the children were unharmed. The one-eyed shinobi absorbed the blow with his arms, then brought his fists together and raised them above his head. The sliced skin flopped and leaked blood, which turned his hair red, but anger pushed the boy past the pain and his fists came down on her head like a hammer. The mutated girl saw stars as she collapsed to the ground, but she also saw a bridge over the river between the blonde's legs and remembered her plan. Naruto formed a Rasengan in his palm and the kid's eyes went wide as they recognized the jutsu. But before he could bring the swirling storm of chakra down, a high-pressure stream erupted from Isaribi's mouth. It launched the 4 boys into the running waters and she quickly dove in after them. The monster made sure to tear apart the helpless children in front of the blonde and let their torn carcasses sink before speeding towards him. Their blood turned the water crimson as Naruto prepared a kick, but he found the move was ineffective underwater as it spun him around. The Chunin craned his neck to see Isaribi lower her dorsal fin and headbutt his side. Bubbles exploded from the shinobi's mouth and he had to try not to inhale water after she drove him into the rocky bottom. The Chunin's arms held the girl at bay, but her claws easily tore into them while reaching for his vital areas. Naruto ignored the pain and just tried to buy some time while he used wind manipulation to pull oxygen from the water into his mouth. With refilled lungs, the Uzumaki channeled chakra into the water around him and used his family's chakra control exercise to create a whirlpool. The two combatants were ripped away from each other and flung in opposite directions, but the sea creature quickly gathered itself and shot towards the shinobi like a bullet. Naruto formed some seals and used the Mizu no Tatsumaki to create a large twister that forced his opponent to veer to the side. Then he whipped through another set and launched two Hanryu, one on either side of the cyclone. Isaribi chose to go right and the torrent of water sent her backwards, but it did the same thing to the Jinchuriki. Naruto smirked as the beast made a sharp U-turn and launched a Hanryu towards the bottom after it got close. The blonde was rocketed upwards as the high-pressure stream blasted the girl into the rocks. The Chunin refilled his lungs again as his opponent scowled at him. Naruto sent a taunting smirk her way and she charged up at him. The Shinobi formed some seals and launched another Hanryu, but Isaribi swam around it and under the Jinchuriki. The Shinobi lost track of her, so stopped the jutsu as she appeared from nowhere and gripped him in a bear hug so tight a whirlpool wouldn't rip them apart. The air was crushed out of Naruto's lungs and his airways were blocked so he couldn't pull oxygen in, form seals, and his palms were pointed upwards so a Rasengan was useless. The blonde was trapped and the black spots in his vision were making it hard to focus his chakra. The Jinchuriki thought he was going to die, but a memory from his last near-death experience flashed through his head. Chakra swirled around Naruto's palm before forming a Rasengan. Isaribi smirked as she watched the chakra bleed away from the technique, unlike the one he used in town. However, the ball suddenly glowed bright blue and exploded, sending blades of chakra everywhere as the shield collapsed. However, it damaged Naruto as much as Isaribi. Still, it gave the blonde space and he was able to create another bubble of air before jetting towards the surface with a Hanryu. The Jinchuriki looked down at the sea monster as he rose to the light, but she didn't follow. Instead, the beast swam towards sea while leaving a trail of red. Once the Chunin's head rose above water, he sighed in relief, until he saw the carnage around him. It was apparent that the creature entered from the river because of the sheer amount of bodies and damage in the area. People were crushed into the ground and rows of houses were torn apart by water blasts. Limbs were scattered everywhere along with chunks of human flesh. Mothers were reaching for their children's corpses, and the bodies of their husbands were almost always nearby. They were usually slaughtered with weapons in their hands and he doubted they had a chance to use them. The boy vomited and ran away from the scene, but as he rushed through town it was impossible to not see the victims' gruesome deaths. Children's eyes stared vacantly upwards, and many times the heads weren't attached to bodies. There was even a large pile bunched together in the corner of a soccer net, like the girl kicked them there for fun. In the main area of town, restaurants and other businesses were destroyed with the patrons still inside. Whole streets were ripped up by blasts of water, leaving people half buried under rubble or flattened. Naruto purposely ignored the massacre as he ran back to the clearing and threw himself into training, his appetite forgotten. He had the Rasengan variation, but now it needed fine-tuning and the boy didn't want clones to break his focus. The problem with the technique was that chakra went everywhere after the blast, so he was liable to get damaged by it. There was no way Jiraiya would okay a technique that caused him as much, if not more pain, than his opponent received. As far as the boy could tell, the problem lay in the shell. The blonde was able to push the memories from the village away as he focused on the swirling chakra in his palm. Orochimaru just gave the scroll containing the gold to one of his snakes when he felt another presence nearby. "I must say you've gotten quite sneaky. Back when we were Jinan it was never hard to find you, even though I never wanted to." The man's golden eye stared at an innocuous spot on the wall before his old teammate seemed to materialize. "Kukuku. Hello Jiraiya, it's been quite some time." A hard look was on the usually jovial man's face. "I'd say not long enough, but I can kill you, so I guess it's worth it." The serpentine man placed a pale hand over his heart. "You're being so cruel. Is that any way to greet your old teammate?" The sage's face remained stony. "I see, well as we are there's no doubt you could kill me. I have no answer for your trump card, but I'll fix that in time. You have no time left, Orochimaru." Jiraiya channeled chakra to his legs, but a sea snake burst from the water behind the Nukenin and swallowed him before diving back in. The Sennin cursed and rushed through the base towards the exit. He made it out quickly, but his traitorous teammate had a good lead and was moving fast. The hermit pushed the boat offshore and ripped the tiny engine off the back before forming two Rasengan and shoving them into the water. The boat zigzagged all over the choppy surface before he got the hang of it and sped off in pursuit. Orochimaru was sitting on top of the serpent and tittered when Jiraiya pulled up on his left. "You were always an idiot, but nobody could call you uncreative." The toad summoner didn't answer, instead formed a seal-less cage bunshine that used Doten, Dorosenden, Earth Release, Mudshot, to launch a wave of mud balls at the snake-like man. Orochimaru managed to contort his body into unnatural positions to avoid the barrage. Once he was able to set his feet, a snake burst from his open mouth with a sword protruding from it. Jiraiya slowed down to avoid the thrust, But the Kusanagi slashed as the reptile looped around and took a chunk from the back of the sage's long mane after dispelling his clone. He cursed and craned his neck to see the shoreline was getting closer, however he felt something moving in the water. The hermit was able to sense its intention well in advance and veered the boat. Something green and scaly launched out of the water, right where his vessel used to be. The creature gracefully soared through the air and landed on the snake before transforming into a girl around Naruto's age with black hair, however she blacked out right after. The traitorous member of the Sannin grabbed the team's shoulder before she fell and nodded towards his old teammate, "Well, I've got everything I came for, ta-ta." The serpent disappeared in a puff of smoke along with its passengers and Jiraiya cursed at the missed opportunity. Orochimaru even admitted he couldn't win. Instead the Sennin looked at the damaged boat and cursed, "How am I going to explain this to the guy I rented it from?" The sage shrugged before forming 2 more Rasengan and heading back to town at a leisurely pace. After arriving at the docks, Jiraiya found that he didn't have to say anything to the owner because he was eviscerated, lying in a pool of his own blood and vomit with eyes wide open in terror. The hermit sighed and closed the dead man's eyes while saying a short prayer. Once finished, he ran through the town so fast it was a blur until the smell of blood, human waste, and bile left his nostrils. After several miles he slowed down and headed towards the area where he left his apprentice. Some of the worry left him when Naruto was lying in the grass, but the defeated way he laid there didn't let it completely vanish. The hermit sighed and sat down next to his godson. The boy's blue eye cracked open after his mentor took a seat and he smiled weakly. "I got the variation down, Uro-Sennin." Jiraiya's eyebrow raised. "Did you now? Well, let me see it." The blonde rose to his feet and held his palm up before forming the Rasengan, except strands of chakra were leaking from the top. When the Sennin looked closer he noticed the technique was almost see-through because of the escaping threads. Naruto pointed the ball away from them before flooding it with chakra. The sphere glowed bright blue before thin blue blades exploded outwards about 3 or so feet before dispersing. It does some damage, but it's mostly shallow cuts. The technique is really for defense. It can deflect or disperse everything I've tried. The Chunin formed a cage bunshine and it powered up the variation. I don't know any katan though, so can you use one? Jiraiya index finger and thumb formed a circle before he lifted them up to his smiling lips and said, "Katan, Boyakasui, small fire stream." A jet of fire about 2 feet wide burst out of the circle when the sage breathed into it. The clone raised the Rasengan and the resulting blast managed to stall the flames momentarily, but after the chakra died out the copy was overtaken. Naruto sighed but Jiraiya gave him a hearty pat on the back. "Hey, that's actually pretty impressive, so don't get down on yourself. No technique is ever perfect, and you just made it, so I'm sure it'll improve with time." The blonde gave an appreciative smile to his godfather. "Now teach it to me, please." The boy's blue eye narrowed before gaining a mischievous glint. "Nope, I'm more of the do-it-yourself kind of guy. If I tell you how it works then you won't learn anything." Jiraiya huffed as Naruto started setting up his tent. "I was going to teach you something awesome, but now you'll get my first original technique and it's only a D rank." Naruto's eye flared with determination. "I don't care as long as it helps me get stronger. I know I've been pestering you for jutsu, but I want to become a better shinobi so what happened in that town never happens again." The boy looked down at his hands. "I was too weak to stop it. The girl had no training and I still let her get the best of me because I was reminded of my childhood. I could have saved them, Jiraiya-sensei." The man sighed and made a bench from stone with his chakra for them to sit on before creating a fire pit. "Listen, Naruto, if you learn one thing from me I hope it's this. You can't do it all. Tragedies are going to happen despite your best efforts. If you blame yourself for everything that goes wrong it'll eat away at you until you're nothing but a shell of your former self. There was nothing more you could have done today. I sensed people alive in the town, so you definitely did more than you think. If you measure failure and success based on everybody living then you'll always be a failure. I like to look towards the future to determine if I was successful in something. If it allows the generations that come after us to live, prosper, and be happy then it was a success. Because of you the people will be able to rebuild Naruto. And that counts for something." The boy's blue eye stared at the ground. And Jiraiya sighed. He didn't expect the team to get it immediately. "Why don't you go catch some fish or something? I'll get the firewood and rustle up the ingredients for a stew." His student nodded before heading towards the stream, and once Jiraiya thought the team was far enough away he formed a Rasengan and started to modify it. Did the Chunin really think a member of the Sannin, legendary ninja, and overall badass would need him to explain a jutsu? Naruto may have the sharingan, but the sage had a seasoned eye and was able to pick apart the jutsu at first glance. The boy weakened the shell at the top of the Rasengan and the space allowed the chakra to seep out, so he had to constantly feed it. Then once it was ready he would overload the ball with chakra. Since it was already flowing out, the extra burst of chakra would continue on the designated path before the shell burst outward. Because chakra has an elastic quality, the middle of the shell pinched together as the top stretched and exploded, so it didn't have any other exit except outwards. Jiraiya let the swirling chakra dissipate and smiled in the direction of his apprentice. He doesn't show it all the time, but there's definitely a little bit of you in there too, Minato. In the northeastern part of Ta-no-Kuni there was a steep hill. It had two large rivers on either side and was just over 1,000 feet above the earth at its highest point. The peak itself was 150 feet long with a width that varied from 80 to 120 feet, and the base was a little over 800 feet long. The waterways were fed from two different springs in the mountains and at some points were nearly half a mile wide before they converged into one river about 3/4 of a mile past the hill. The one easy way to the summit was a path that looped around it with several checkpoints that were heavily guarded. The only other way was straight up the northern slope because the other three had several sheer drops that would make ascent suicide for an army. However, a charge up the north slope wasn't much better because the grade was 32 degrees at some points. If the commander tried that approach and somehow managed to get past all the traps, archers, and cannons, they'd be easy pickings at the top. It was a perfectly defensible position, and that's why the new daimyo chose it for the location of his home. There was nothing gaudy about the building at the top. It sat in the middle of the widest part was carved from the hill itself. The walls were 20 feet high, and extended the width of the peak at its narrowest points. There were also cannons and catapults dotting its length. The building itself was circular, only 50 feet high, but it was 40 feet wide and dug into the ground about 20 feet. The inside was sparsely furnished but filled with enough supplies and weapons to withstand a siege for years. It was also a veritable maze to confuse intruders and guests so they couldn't get a feel for the layout. The daimyo of Ta-no-Kuni, Amakusa Shiro, was related to the previous ruler but never in line for the throne, nor did he want to be. The man was a hair over 6 feet tall, had sharp, angular features, and brown hair in a ponytail that reached the base of his neck. His slate eyes gleamed with intelligence and cunning, and he sported a finely trimmed goatee to show respect for the Amakusa's customs. The lord was practical as the fortress, his office and wardrobe showed it. The floor was bare stone and the desk was carved from it. The only decorations that hung were a large world map on the left wall, a detailed map of Ta-no-Kuni on the right, and behind him was the code of law so his guests would see that when looking upon him. No pictures were hung because that would show visitors a potential weakness to expose his humanity. The only other thing besides the stone desk was 4 cushioned chairs, one behind it, and a mannequin that proudly displayed his old Special Forces armor. Danshin and forearm guards along with chest armor that was imbued with seals and an Oni mask hung on the wooden doll. The man wore standard gray shinobi pants with the ends tucked into bandages that wrapped up to the middle of his shin, and his black, long-sleeve spandex revealed his honed muscles as he reached for the next paper. As a boy, Shiro looked upon his slovenly relatives that basked in the luxuries handed to them with disdain. He was never very close to the other children in the court, but he met people with beliefs he could respect after befriending the guardian clan of the royal family, the Amakusa. The land of rice never adopted the village system, instead the clans pledged allegiance, and taxes, to the daimyo. They were then given the right to divide his country into territories they would protect and take a tithe from. When the Amakusa demanded the largest and most populated piece, the other clans weren't in a position to refuse. Afterwards they were given the honor of guarding the daimyo's family in recognition of their strength. The clan was so large and powerful because it had a unique practice. The Amakusa would take in anybody under the age of 15. But they only had 5 years to pass an intense course. Many failed and simply became vassals, including those born into the Amakusa, and performed domestic duties that were needed. They lived a comfortable lifestyle and were still respected as clan members, but those who passed were given the name Amakusa and treated as a blood relative with limitless opportunity. Because of this they didn't specialize in anything, however if you were to ask one they would say winning was the specialty of the Amakusa. Shiro practically grew up among the clan, spending less and less time with his blood relations as he got older. When the time came for his friends to begin the program, he asked the clan leader for permission to take part. The boy was allowed to enter with the condition he would become a vassal if he failed, just like everyone else. At first the royal child was humored in person, but mocked when they thought he was gone. However, Shiro reveled in it. Finally he had to earn something instead of getting it handed to him on a golden platter. Their mocking drove the boy harder and he passed in less than 2 years. Then the degrading whispers became odd ones as Shiro continued to grow until there were only a few Amakusa stronger than him. His birth family could hardly recognize their forgotten son when he returned with finely honed muscles, tanned skin, and the stray whiskers that would eventually grow into the clan's traditional beard. Thankfully the stay was brief. The teen had only come because he was the eldest child and needed to pass the right to succeed their father to his younger brother, and forfeit his inheritance. The family looked at him strangely after, unable to understand why he gave away his position and wealth. But Shiro didn't understand how people existed as they did, it just didn't seem like living to the teen. Politics was for weak men with deceitful minds. Always surrounded by fake people with honeyed tongues. Stroking anybody's ego to curry favor, then slandering that person to rivals. These frail men were ignorant of the outside world. Never leaving the gates of the wealthy districts and their various gilded palaces except to attend festivals or high court in the capital once a year, possibly more if necessary. The only traveling nobles did was on the main roads to other large cities, but the pompous fools still claimed to know what was best for the nation they governed. Shiro was the one who explored the countryside and saw what it had become. The basic infrastructure of Tano-kuni was decaying and there was more traffic heading out of the country than in. Villages had to be abandoned when dams broke and perfectly good farmland was overgrown because there was nobody to cultivate it. Famine was clearly on the horizon if this trend continued. Still his grandfather did nothing. Shiro learned from his friends that guarded court the senile fart continued to sign unfair trade agreements while accepting bribes from the countries to line his pockets. Rage almost overtook the shinobi, but his brothers managed to calm him down before doing anything rash. Then that man came. Orochimaru appeared and offered him and his family, his true family, a chance to change things. The Serpentine Ninja was a legend and his mere presence was enough to convince the most hesitant Amakusa to join. After the legendary shinobi sided with Tano-kuni's strongest clan, the others got in line before getting taken out. The traitorous member of the Sannin could probably kill most of the smaller clans himself. What came next was a nearly bloodless execution, except for Shiro's blood relations. With the other clans secretly retracting their support to the daimyo, it was easy for their personal guards to kill them with no repercussions. They were slaughtered to the last child. Then came the deconstruction all the old nobles' mansions, palaces, vacation homes, and any other property before selling everything related to the old regime for funds. Unfortunately, the new daimyo couldn't reverse the trade contracts immediately. That could lead to outside intervention from an angry government, but he had managed to pack away enough to start rebuilding the country and he took to it immediately. Large numbers of displaced peasants were collected and pulled together on the most fertile land. Agriculture did an immediate 180 and they were now producing a surplus, although the mass emigration under his grandfather made that easy. Once the agricultural economy started recovering, the remaining workers started rebuilding the roads and dams. Soon enough the old farms would be usable again and the country could continue to grow. And the trading agreements expired at the year's end, so Shiro could finally demand better prices. Now that he was firmly entrenched, the cost of blood wouldn't equal the extra money the other nations would be spending. They would have no choice but to bend. The daimyo had a content smile on his face that only grew larger before he spoke. "Hello Kotaro." A jovial-looking man with long black hair and a thick beard that extended past his belly button appeared out of nowhere. He had a round face, though it was impossible to tell through his facial hair, and wore a black hakama with white trim around the edges, a white belt, and wooden geta. His name was Amakusa Kotaro, head of the clan and Shiro's best friend since childhood. Unlike most leaders, the man didn't inherit his position. Instead, the shinobi claimed it by emerging as the clear-cut favorite after a series of challenges designed to test one's physical and mental aptitude. "One of these days I will sneak up on you, Shiro. I don't see why you bother. You helped design the security for the building and know it's almost impossible not to know when somebody is approaching me." The shinobi made a point of playing with his untamed beard while his friend continued filling out paperwork. "Well, when I do sneak up on you, it'll expose a flaw and possibly save your life. You should be thanking me for my efforts." The daimyo finished his papers and glared at his friend. "Stop doing that. You know why I had to shave it off." Kotaro's hands dropped to his sides, but he started fidgeting uncomfortably. "You have a visitor." Shiro's eyebrow lifted. "Oh, there were none scheduled today." The clan leader coughed into his hand. "Well, he kind of just appeared outside the building and asked to see you." The slate-eyed man had a sinking feeling in his stomach. "Well, out with it. Who's here?" The daimyo couldn't help but frown after hearing Orochimaru-sama, and had to suppress a sigh. It had been such a pleasantly long time since the man's last visit, and whenever he showed up it was always to ask seemingly impossible things, but the worst part was it's impossible to say no. "Send him in." The doors opened and the head of Otogakure no Sato gracefully strolled in before offering an awkward bow, like he wasn't used to the motion. "It is good to see you well, Shiro-sama. Too much time has passed since we last spoke. Tell me, is everything about the building acceptable?" Just say the word and I'll have my Doten users return. This was how it always began, the niceties and generous offers that cost the man nothing. However, the tables would soon turn and he would ask for some insignificant favor. Still, the daimyo had to tread carefully because the Amakusa was the only clan he knew was absolutely loyal. His family had been the big bully on the block for too long, and most, if not all, the minor clans would side with the snake-like man over Shiro. No, everything is perfect. I couldn't ask for more. We'll see if you say that after you hear what I'm offering. Orochimaru summoned a 4-foot-long snake that was half a foot wide, and 2 scrolls came out of its unhinged jaw. The twisted shinobi picked up one with an amused grin and unsealed the contents. The 2 Amakusa's eyes shot open when the smoke cleared and sizable portion of the office was filled with gold ingots and nuggets of various sizes. They were speechless for nearly a minute before Shiro managed to speak. What is this? The snake summoner dismissed his pet and placed the other scroll on the smooth stone desk before taking a seat. I'm glad you asked. This is approximately 40% of the gold in my possession. That other scroll contains another 50. I haven't been keeping track of the minor loans I've taken out, but I'll assume this pays it off while giving me some credit, and I'd wager that other scroll makes it unlimited. I know the trade contracts are coming up and you're assuming the other nations will cave at the negotiation table after such favorable trade contracts for so long. The Serpentine man let the thought settle for a moment. However, if you begin to improve your infrastructure now, it can give the country some leverage. Discreetly turn that into liquid capital, then buy a large amount of concrete from Iwagakure and pay up front. After, get some lumber from Fire Country and iron from Tetsu no Kuni, Land of Iron, with cash as well. After showing you have money and will take the best offer, other countries will listen. I can assure you Hai no Kuni has no desire to see the Land of Earth gain a wealthy trading partner. Shiro and Kotaro stared at each other. The 2 friends knew each other so long they could almost have full conversations with their eyes. It was another deal with the devil, but one had already been made. It's not like he could steal their souls twice. The daimyo nodded. Thank you for your generosity, but can I ask why you need unlimited credit? Orochimaru chuckled. Kukaku, of course you may, Shiro Dono. We are friends after all. An awkward silence settled over the 3 before the pale man said, well, are you going to ask? Kotaro's smile became strained as he tried to interpose. I think we're a little overwhelmed at this. I don't even know what to call it. We've never been very material, but this is too much for any man to take in. It could tempt even the stoutest of monks. Would you please explain why you're just giving it over, Orochimaru-sama? I believe I gave permission to the daimyo to ask, no? The Amakusa leader stopped smiling for what seemed like the first time in years, or the last time he saw the snake, but stepped back when his friend coughed. Why do you need unlimited credit, Orochimaru Dono? The Serpentine man nodded towards the world map. Because Ta no Kuni never formed a shinobi village, it hasn't been a player on the world stage, but I have seen the birth and death of 2 great wars. Believe me when I say the winds of change are blowing and the landscape looking more uncertain. The 4th war is on the horizon. We are in a tenuous position because of the treaty that ties us to the Land of Fire and its allies. They may not appreciate the fact that I am in charge of the village, and I doubt Iwa or Kuma would sign a treaty with us during the war. Otogakure and the Land of Rice could very easily find itself standing alone in the middle of giants. Orochimaru stood and approached the daimyo's armor before lightly running a finger over the fine metal. You could be wearing this quite soon, Shiro Dono. I am taking steps towards rectifying the problem, but without being allied to a great nation we wouldn't have enough steel or coal to arm ourselves for a long war. The major countries rose to prominence because of their natural advantages, the smaller ones were cut from the leftovers. The former Konohanian seemed to glide over to the world map and pointed at Ta's neighbor to the northwest. You know, Kuni has little natural resources like us, but it's blocking the way to Shimo no Kuni, which holds large ore, coal, and lumber deposits. Not to mention it would give us access to the other ocean without having to circumvent Kumo. I'm proposing a secret war against Yu no Kuni and Shimo no Kuni, with the latter being the prize. Yu's shinobi village shouldn't even be called that anymore, and the standing army is weak because it's surrounded by vices. They can barely keep control of regular criminals. Otto could easily steamroll through there without open conflict. All we have to do is stir up the populace. Start sabotaging roads, dams, manufacture fake disasters, supply bandit and nuke cells, anything to make life hard. Once it becomes apparent their village can't do anything, they will naturally hire us because of the discounted price of missions. But why do I need more money? The man's golden eyes narrowed as they stared at the gem he so coveted. Shimo will be a little more difficult to subdue. The village is small in numbers, but the environment and proximity to Kaminari no Kuni have hardened them. However, I have confidence we can keep it isolated and win without major cost before subduing the population and setting up a governor. They absolutely hate Kumo and won't want to reveal any weakness to them, but they could get a message to Konoha by sea. Oh my, you are importing all that lumber, steel, and concrete. You could easily build some ships and bases. It's such a coincidence too, because I already have a fleet admiral in mind. Shiro was torn. This put him in serious danger. If the major nations found out they were trying to subdue two countries, the intervention would be swift and brutal. The alpha dogs didn't want another one to grow up. Still, if Orochimaru could pull this off, Ricefield country would be a big dog too. The resources of Yu and Shimo, their population, and former shinobi would make Dano Kuni an elite nation, and if it failed he might be able to make Orochimaru the scapegoat. After considering it for several minutes, the brown-haired man nodded. You have your credit, but I want a detailed strategy, progress reports, and a complete record of your expenses as they develop. The snake-like man inclined his head. Of course, you are too kind, Shiro Dono. I shall be in touch. The daimyo let out a sigh of relief after the deadly shinobi sunk into the floor and his barriers indicated he left their range. Still, if someone could bypass the system, Shiro would bet on Orochimaru. The Amakusa's system never sensed the man until he passed the final and most powerful detection ward. You play a dangerous game, old friend. The brown-haired man stroked his trimmed goatee out of habit. We already had a foot in, brother, and he wasn't going to let us take it out. At least this way we get something. Kotaro nodded absently but still looked troubled. He may bring us to new heights, but Orochimaru is not the foundation I want to build a country on. He doesn't seem very stable. Shiro could only nod because he completely agreed, but they were trapped. The daimyo handed him the other scroll before saying, I doubt this is 90% of the gold in his possession, but it's still more liquid capital than we've ever had. Get somebody in here to seal the rest of this up and put these in a safe place. Places. Also get somebody to look over my armor to see if the snake did anything, and if not, have them wash it until his stink is gone. The bearded shinobi gave a respectful bow and put the scroll in his sleeve before heading out to fulfill his orders. Once he was gone, the daimyo slumped in his chair and sighed. It was still strange giving orders to Kotaro. Shiro reached into his hidden drawer before pouring himself a generous saucer of sake and sipping. The one good thing about this job was the booze. Kabuto stood just outside the entrance to Otogakuru's main base nearly 2 months after assembling the requested shinobi. He was reclined against an outcropping of rock sand, appeared to waiting for something. Even though nothing seemed to have changed, the teen shoved himself upright and pushed the slipping glasses up his nose while saying, Hello Orochimaru-sama. The former Konohanin seemed to float through the earth until his feet emerged. I see you got my message then, excellent. The medic bowed low before nodding, of course, although you were gone longer than expected. I hope you didn't run into any trouble. A pale hand waved dismissively before the unasked question was casually pushed aside. Oh no, I just stopped by to have a chat with the daimyo. Since we're both important men in this country, I think it's beneficial to have a healthy working relationship. After that I had to talk to some new friends, but never mind that. Tell me, what have you learned about Isaribi-chan? Kabuto was curious about these new friends. The snake summoner's previous ones were the Akatsuki after all. Still, he knew better than to revisit a subject after it was changed. Something quite interesting actually. Amachi managed to isolate an enzyme that triggers the transformation and injected her with it. However, I'd wager the batch he used on himself was a more refined formula. The girl's cells were literally waiting for the influx of power from the seal, but without it she couldn't control the transformation on a fine level. I managed to isolate the code in her DNA and replicate the process. Unfortunately, only 2 and 9 survived. On top of that, half turned into mindless beasts after the metamorphosis and lost the intelligence to change back. Orochimaru nodded and considered the possibilities. Having the ability to almost guarantee survival of the cursed seal could be a major boon. However, it took Amachi years to get to that point, and his formula might only produce the Kaima transformation. Isaribi and Suigetsu are more than enough to control the seas right now, and I'd rather have Kabuto focusing on other things. Amachi was one of the better scientists working for me, despite his lack of common sense. The Nuke Nin opened the hidden entrance after making his decision. Save the notes and store them somewhere safe. There is potential in that, but it's not a priority for someone with all the time in the world. Now fetch me a prisoner for the ritual. Have them ready within the hour. After entering the base, they saw a Dan shinobi who immediately bowed. He had light brown hair that stopped at the base of his neck and a lavender vest with a matching scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, with both ends tucked in. The spy straightened his torso, revealing his bare chest under the clothing and a roll of bandages wrapped around his abdomen. He also wore black bracers that went up his forearm, tan pants, and dark brown sandals. Kabuto glared at the man. He made sure nobody else got the message, so how did the bat user know to follow him? Otto's leader tittered in his second sire before greeting the newcomer. "Hello Renji, thank you for fetching Goren." The brown-haired shinobi put an arm behind his back and gave a half-bow in response. "Anything for you Orochimaru-sama." "Oh, then perhaps you could prepare a prisoner for me and bring him to medical bay S." Brown sandals scraped against the ground as he hastily turned to carry out the request, but the golden-eyed man interrupted, so eager, "Just make sure they're the strongest available." With another more bow Renji headed towards the prisoner's quarters while Kabuto asked, "Why did you let him do that?" The serpentine man smirked and lectured the medic like a child. "It's simple really, he feels more important now and it increases his loyalty." "Why, did I make you jealous Kabuto-kun?" The teen's head shook side to side as he answered the mocking question, "Of course not Orochimaru-sama, I just wondered if you were going to let him watch the procedure." The traitorous member of the Sannin actually laughed while navigating the corridors, with his long black hair billowing behind him as they headed towards the medical bay. "I won't deny him if he longs to witness my true glory. Now prepare the surgery table. Today is a big day, so many things to do, so many possibilities." Renji watched the victor separate the head from his last opponent's body with the metal leg of a table he wielded like a club. The remaining survivors had tried to overpower the juggernaut with a combined assault, however the strategy was ineffective and they were efficiently slaughtered one by one. The bat user had walked into the prisoner's mess hall during mealtime and proclaimed the last one standing can leave, which ignited a brutal free-for-all. Some tried to gang up and overpower the shinobi at first, but he easily dispatched them and their corpses served as a deterrent to the others. All the prisoners' chakra had been sealed off so the most physically capable ones held an advantage in the fight, but that's what he wanted. The winner had white hair and was half a foot taller than Renji, quite muscular too. The smaller man still took the lead without concern and walked towards their fate. He forced the prisoner to prostrate after entering the medical bay before bowing himself. Orochimaru stood and gestured for the brown-haired man to move aside before spreading his arms. When Renji was clear, the serpentine man opened his mouth while looking to the ceiling. Pale skin fell like a discarded costume as a large white snake with spiky black hair and the Nukenin's features burst from his mouth before swallowing the horrified prisoner. The serpent twisted and turned on itself after the meal and progressively got smaller until just the white-haired prisoner was standing there, although the predatorial gold eyes clearly pointed out the body's new inhabitant. Renji was awestruck as Orochimaru's vessel nearly collapsed, but Kabuto caught the man before that could happen. He put the limp body onto a table and strapped a mask over his mouth and nose. The silver-haired medic didn't appear fazed by the events as he set the limiter on the valve before opening it, but the teen's mind was racing. As the drug took effect, Kabuto spaced out slightly while remembering the orders Sasori gave him on the Tenchi Bridge. Akatsuki wanted the snake summoner dead, and this was his best chance to complete the task. Because of the snake-like man's awesome resistance to drugs and poisons, they had to invent an incredibly potent concoction every transfer just to knock him out. A slight overdose of these deadly mixtures would do anyone in, even Orochimaru. He just needed to loosen the limiter on the end and act like nothing was wrong. He could probably use Renji as a scapegoat to appease Guren and Kimimaro too. Unbeknownst to the other two occupants, Orochimaru kept his consciousness in a small white snake, less than a foot long and an inch and a half wide, inside the discarded skin of his old body. Slit pupils were locked onto the teen's hand, truly curious to see what he would do. The serpent eagerly waited the choice because it would determine the course of his ascension. The direction of all his plans hinged on this moment. Kabuto's fingers twitched several times near the lever before they gripped a scalpel and started the procedure that would better facilitate the transfer to his new vessel. Once the procedure was done and his new body bandaged, the monster made its move. Orochimaru left behind orders before transferring his consciousness to the receptacle on the table. An ear-splitting screech pierced the air as Kabuto turned in surprise to see a smaller version of Orochimaru's snake form burst out of his shed skin. It moved so fast the medic had no time to react as the creature became airborne. His eyes closed and the shinobi felt the air being displaced next to his head before a muffled cry of pain forced the boy out of his stupor. He turned in surprise and saw Renji trying to pull the snake out of his throat by its tail, but the fight was futile from the beginning. His attempts barely slowed the creature down and it disappeared into his esophagus. After settling in the bat user's stomach, it pierced the lining and melted so its DNA would merge with the unfortunate victim. Renji howled in agony as the real Orochimaru weakly sat up and slid off the table before hobbling towards the door. "Help me to the throne room and gather everybody there. It's a little too noisy in here." Kabuto escorted his master to the chamber and gently lowered him into the cushioned chair, but before he pulled away the bandaged shinobi hissed into his ear, "Congratulations on passing the test, Kabuto-kun. The boy jumped back in surprise and Orochimaru chuckled mockingly, "Did you think I didn't know about your last meeting with my former partner, and that nasty little order to kill me? I don't like the fact these measures of your loyalty were necessary. But you passed and I am glad. Now run along." The teen opened the door but stopped when he heard, "Would you like to know why you didn't fail, Kabuto?" He turned and nodded, so the man continued, "Because you're scared. If I was gone you wouldn't have a direction and that terrifies you. You'd just be a lost little boy without his mommy." So the little mouse made himself useful to the snake, hoping to not get eaten, and make no mistake about it, my little rodent. When the day comes that you are more useful to me dead, I will devour you like the fool back there. Now go and fetch everybody." Kabuto quietly scurried away to carry out the order as Renji's pain cries echoed in his head. Ranmaru stared curiously at a bandaged man he knew was Orochimaru, but also wasn't at the same time. Kimimaro had no reaction, except for the slight feeling of disappointment that he shared with a woman across the room, so the ninja in training didn't make a big deal out of it. The boy had changed greatly these last 3 months. The Kiri native's pale skin had taken on a healthy tan and small muscles were starting to show on his bare arms. The student now wore an outfit that resembled his idol's, black shinobi pants with holsters on both legs, a small rope belt, and a sleeveless lavender shirt that matched his hair. Ranmaru also had a wooden bow staff on his back that was about 3 feet long and blackened by ash. It served as a walking stick when needed, although not much anymore. He had made remarkable strides in his recovery since receiving the cursed seal. With proper nutrition and a strict exercise regime enforced by the Kaguya, his health had greatly improved. Now he looked like a small kid his age instead of a 5-year-old. He stared up at Kimimaro and would have giggled at the look on his sensei's face as he glowered at a kunoichi across the room, but the Kaguya had made it clear that in public they had to remain serious despite the familiarity between them. The boy adjusted his gaze and looked at the woman who was the recipient of the teen's ire. He wondered if she turned Kimimaro down for a date request. Even a child with no concept of the word could tell she was beautiful. The kunoichi's light blue hair was pulled into a spiked ponytail on the back of her head, except for 2 long strands that framed her angular face. She had dark eyes that contrasted her pale skin, while glaring frostily at the pale teen, and ruby red lipstick accentuated her pouting lips. The woman wore a green dress over a red full-body jumpsuit, brown leather gloves that had intricate designs etched into them, and matching boots that had the same patterns etched into them. The dress left sleeve came down to her wrist while the right one stopped at the elbow, and it had a thick white collar made of fur that covered her neck. Another white-haired teen that stood alone against the wall and revealed his sharpened teeth as he grinned wolfishly at Isaribi, causing her to blush and avert her gaze. A red-headed teenage girl around the same age as them, with black-rimmed glasses and red eyes, was staring worriedly at a large orange-haired boy that was a couple years older standing near the bone user. The child wondered why, though. He had a serene smile and seemed incredibly calm. The only other people in the room were 3 boys that were about the age of the other teens. They all wore sleeveless gray tunics with 4 crystals drawn around the hem, black pants, black sandals, and black bracers on their forearms. The largest boy was quite fleshy and had 2 3-inch stripes shaved out of his head, leaving a mohawk and 2 orange strips above his ears. His narrow reddish-orange eyes stared at the tan boy with 6 arms, all with bracers, and dark brown hair pulled into a ponytail. He had black eyes that were staring intently at his hands while playing a 3-way game of Jankenpon with himself. The third was a rather effeminate boy with pale skin, gray hair that came down to his shoulders and covered his right eye, a necklace of purple prayer beads, and green. The ninja was ignoring them and appeared to be so deep in thought he was having a conversation with himself. The room was blanketed by an awkward silence that was finally broken when the door opened, revealing a peculiar sight, and among Auto Shinobi that was saying something. A porcelain man that had scales covering his hairless body stepped into the room and looked at the occupants with the same golden eyes as Orochimaru, although the creatures were glossy and vacant instead of calculating and ravenous. The only thing it had on was a pair of tattered tan pants that were completely destroyed just below the knees, and stretched tightly around his thighs. The albino monster was 6'10" with a wingspan of 7 feet tipped by wickedly sharp black claws. He also had a matching set on his 3 hooked toes with large dew claws coming off the back of his feet to complete the set. Dripping 4-inch fangs protruded from a lipless mouth that had a forked tongue rapidly snaking in and out, but those weren't his only, or most dangerous, natural weapons. A large snake sprouted from the base of his spine like a tail. It was 8 inches wide and the length kept changing while it swayed side to side behind the thing's bald head. Their forked tongues were synchronized while flitting in and out, and Orochimaru spoke through the bandages, which muffled his voice. "Say hello to Renji, everyone. The man wanted to become my second, so I gave him a chance. It appeared he survived. but couldn't manage to control my DNA. I guess he just can't measure up to those gathered here. He smirked under his bandages as they all preened at the compliment. Oh well. His wish will be granted, but I doubt he'll have the mental faculties left to enjoy it. Now the poor thing is no better than a mindless drone, albeit one that's considerably faster, stronger, has the ability to use venom, heal at a faster rate, and many other wonderful things. Now that everyone is here, we shall begin. The room's occupants paid the transformed man no heed as he blankly stared at a wall. Things are rapidly shifting in the political landscape and opportunity is ripe for those who can seize it. The great nations gaze at rivals across the continent while strengthening their militaries. A tiny nation like Dano Kuni is nothing but an inconvenience in their eyes. We will take advantage of that lax guard. From this point forward, Oto's army shall be divided into 3 divisions, the first headed by Guren. The woman in the green dress looked honored before giving Kimimaro a haughty smirk. You shall be my crystal sword. Your first task is to covertly sabotage Kuni. Hire Nukenin, supply bandits, use disguised troops. I don't care about the methods. Just wreak havoc on the country and kill any hot water shinobi that's seen. I have lowered our mission prices so once it becomes too much they will surely use us because of proximity. The nobles I've been talking to will help that along too. This is where the second division led by Kimimaro comes in. He shall be my bone shield. The Kaguya had no outwards reaction except the slight upturning of his lips as he sensed Guren's fury at his position. We shall pull our shinobi out as you go in and subdue the rogue elements still active in the land of hot water. While you're doing this, Guren will use the northern part of the country as a highway into Shimo no Kuni. Her troops will be escorting the 3rd division led by Isaribi. Orochimaru looked at the surprised girl directly before continuing. You two will discreetly lead your soldiers to the largest harbor on the eastern seaboard and capture it. Once it is done, Isaribi shall fortify the city and consolidate as many boats as possible before setting up a blockade. The official reason shall be piracy to any visiting ships. You will be authorized to pay market value and safely transport the goods to land, but the true purpose will be stopping any distress calls from getting out. Shimo won't reach out to Kumagakure because they're more likely to come as conquerors instead of saviors. Their only real option is Konoha. I can assure you they won't slip through Ta, or you when we're done with it. After the ships are in place and the city secure, Guren will unleash her army on the countryside and break their spirit by any means necessary. The man paused to make sure everyone was following him before continuing. While this is going on, Kabuto will take over the responsibility of supplying the bandits and Nukenin and Yonokuni so our reputation and influence continues to grow. I will set up a puppet government once the instability is ripe, and Kimimaro shall move on to Shimo as well. His duty there will be to stop the uprisings from rebel factions in captured areas while recruiting so Guren can push forward quickly. Hopefully we can install a governor and begin harvesting their resources in 3 to 4 years at the most. The Serpentine, Shinobi nodded towards the unmentioned occupants. The others in this room shall be lieutenants. Karen and Jirobo shall be under Guren's command. He turned towards their appointed leader. Her chakra sensing abilities will be invaluable on the front lines and his earth techniques shall be your shield. The pudgy teen had no reaction to the announcement and red-headed girl glanced at the woman while scrutinizing her chakra. However, she couldn't get a feel for the commander, almost like the Kunoichi's chakra was just taking up space. He then looked at the Kaguya. Kimimaro's lieutenants shall be Ranmaru, Ju-Ugo, and Kitamaru. The boy's eyes shall be invaluable when searching for rebels, as will Ju-Ugo's ability with birds. And your former subordinate's ability to capture enemies alive will be a boon for capture, interrogation, and possible recruitment purposes. Show the prisoners how much better life can be on our side. Ranmaru beamed at the pale Kaguya and Ju-Ugo also seemed pleased about the assignment. That was the exact opposite reaction of the 6-armed boy who looked like he was getting hung within the hour as he eyed the older teenagers. Finally he looked at his most recent acquisition. Isaribi shall be in command of Suigetsu, Sakon, and Ukon. The shark-toothed boy looked eager while the effeminate teenager sized the girl up. He turned towards her subordinates. She hasn't had much shinobi training, but her potential far outstrips both of yours. Help her along and I'm sure everything will go swimmingly. The former member of the Sanin turned towards Guren. I hope you don't mind, but I'd like to make Isaribi your pupil. She could learn much in your care. The crystal user bowed. It would be an honor, Orochimaru-sama. The blue-haired woman glared at the two assigned to her. Besides, I can sense the incompetence of my lieutenants and already plan to correct the problem. He gave a quick nod towards her before dismissing them. Excellent, I leave you to prepare and we'll have more information about the assignments delivered later. Now if you don't mind, I'm feeling quite tired. Everybody but Renji walked out the door. Once it closed, the transformed man stared vacantly at the sealed portal and only knew he had to protect the man behind him at all costs. It had been 4 months since Naruto had last seen Konoha, and they were camping in Tano Kuni. The stars were twinkling brightly and a merry fire crackled as master and pupil ate dinner. They had been moving at a slow pace recently, but that was because Naruto's training had intensified like Jiraiya said it would. The Chunin mastered the Totan no Jutsu in no time and continued to plow ahead in Fuuin Jutsu with help from his father's book. The sage even had to send a toad back to Konoha to get Uzumaki sealing scrolls to fill in some gaps. The hermit had taken the limits off the cage Bunshine training, and nearly every day there was a veritable army of them working on applying different seals to things with chakra. It was more complicated than it sounded because the chakra had to be molded into the shape of the seal before application. To make things harder, he had to increase the flow and density just before contact to brand the target. Fortunately, the blonde already had some experience with shape manipulation, so his clones were making progress, albeit slow. It really picked up when the copies stopped practicing with exploding seals. Instead, he took some inspiration from Tuya and created a seal that launches a sonic boom. While his Bunshine worked on one style of chakra manipulation, Naruto worked on perfecting the next futon exercise. Whenever they stopped to train, Jiraiya raised a platform from the earth and created a small waterfall for him to work on. He also trained his physical skills and sparred with the Sennin daily, although it was more of a glorified ass-kicking. However, the most important part of his development came when he finished training. Every night the two would have a conversation over the fire. Even though he acted like a large child, Jiraiya was well-traveled and had met many different people in dozens of countries, big and small, with varying traditions and beliefs. The sage would regale the boy with different stories that highlighted them and prod his mind with leading questions to get an opinion. For the most part, he was quite surprised at how deep and well thought out some of the answers were. They weren't things people spewed out after a couple seconds of reflection. The hermit put down his bowl and let out a healthy burp before starting another discussion. You'd never guess this in a million years, but more of the military budget goes into spying on our allies than enemies. The blonde cocked his eyebrow in response, and the sage elaborated, I know that sounds us backwards, but everybody knows that Iwa wants to wipe us out, yet Kuza can tell us anything while doing something else. Naruto's blue eyes stared into the flames. I kind of understand, but it's still stupid. I heard an example in Kikakure. That was only the higher-ups, right? The shinobi were just following orders? The sage smiled at his godson and shook his head. It's not that simple, my boy, nothing is. The Hokage only has power because we give it to him. The old man may be impossibly strong for his age, but eventually he'd fall to numbers. Hell, I know a couple jounin that could take him down with a competent team for backup. Following orders is never an excuse, Naruto. There are always things more important than the mission. Although it's not an easy thing to decide. Look up the story of the White Fangs someday. What about our alliance with Suna? Immediately questioned the Chunin. He understood what his sensei was trying to get at, but it just seemed fundamentally wrong. That's the most remarkable thing I've ever seen. There's been nothing like it before, and I hope it paves the way towards more solid alliances in the future. However, you're only looking at the surface again. Who's the Suna chick that was put on your team? The man was giving Naruto a knowing look through the explanation, which threw him off for a moment. Tamari-chan. The boy trailed off before his eye flashed with recognition. She's the Kage's daughter. Jiraiya picked up right where his student left off, and was put on the same team as the Yondaime Hokage's son, who's also one of the last known Uzumaki to boot. Did you know that the Hyuga, Aburame, and Inuzuka heirs went to Suna to team up with his oldest son? A lot of the younger shinobi were handpicked by the old man and the Kage because of their future positions or influence over their peers. Adults are already set in their ways, but a kid's opinion can be swayed pretty easily, especially by a well-liked one. The blonde couldn't help but frown after hearing that piece of information. It sounds kind of dirty when you say it like that. Jiraiya let out a boisterous laugh. I guess you're right. That's why the path to peace will be challenging as long as the shinobi system continues. I think the only way for everyone to live together is to understand one another, but that's impossible if your motives are cloaked in shadow. How can anybody accept a hand extended in friendship that traditionally stabs allies in the back? Have you heard about the tragedy of Yosuga Pass? The blonde shook his head, and Jiraiya told the story. After the Third War, Iwagakure and Kirigakure were allies, and to further seal the alliance they each sent a squad a joint mission to retrieve stolen documents from a Kumo team. The mission was a success, but after completing the objective, Kiri was betrayed so Iwa could take them for itself and blame the Kumo team. It didn't go as planned though. One missed shinobi escaped the ambush and lived to tell the tale. Ever since the villages have harbored a bitter hatred towards one another, and it started a cold war that spawned many proximity battles across the continent using nuke minor villages, and terrorist cells. The conflict has died off recently, but I'd bet my life savings that a Kiri nin would stop at nothing to hunt down an Iwa nin if they thought one was close by, and vice versa. When that happens, the cycle of hatred is perpetuated because their loved ones will seek revenge, but if they succeed then it starts over again. It's a vicious circle that feeds itself. Naruto looked at his godfather with awe. He'd never heard Jiraiya be that serious about anything. The sage seemed unaware of his student's quiet astonishment though and continued, "Still, I hope to find a way to overcome those obstacles and spread peace. If I fail I'm going to entrust my dream to you Naruto, and if you can't do it then I hope you'll pass it on to your children, your many children." The man trailed off with a lecherous giggle and the boy saluted his sensei while a grin split his face. "Yes sir, you can count on me." "Ah, your smile is my salvation Gaki. Now douse the fire and get some sleep, we have an unscheduled stop to make tomorrow." The blonde looked at Jiraiya strangely. "Unscheduled? Is anything scheduled? I thought we were wandering." Jiraiya opened his tent before letting out an exaggerated yawn and laughing awkwardly. "Ha, ha. Well look at the time, I'm going to bed. Good night Naruto." It was early afternoon the next day when the two walked into a town filled with traditional architecture. A majority of the buildings were old and rickety, but it was apparent that most of the village was getting an overhaul. Almost immediately a young man with violet hair and pale green eyes stopped working and walked over to greet them. He was wearing gray pants and a green t-shirt that had cream-colored sleeves with a matching collar while an inviting smile stretched across his cheeks. "Hello, you must be Jiraiya-sama. My name is Arashi and I'm the leader of the Fuima clan. Kotohime said you might show up at any time." The silver-haired man showed no reaction, but was really quite confused that the Fuima knew the identity his informant was, or that he even had one. Although the most recent messages indicated that the clan was becoming disillusioned with Orochimaru, she still shouldn't have said anything. He just played it off like it was expected and nodded yes, I was hoping to talk to her. A girl slightly younger than Naruto ran out of one of the better-kept houses. She had long orange hair that was under a blue hat and her brown eyes varied shades. The teen was wearing army green pants, a dull lavender vest that had slightly darker collar and stitching around the armholes, and purple forearm bands. Kunai holsters were strapped to her shapely thighs and she moved with grace that spoke of shinobi training. The teen also offered a kind smile to the duo and bowed, "I'm Fuuma Sesame. Nei-chan's group is on duty for a couple of weeks so she's at Northgate. You'll have to go there." Jiraiya nodded, "Thank you Sesame-chan." But how the man trailed off when it became apparent she wasn't paying attention to him. The brown-eyed girl turned her sparkling orbs onto Naruto and had a light blush on her face. "Are you really Jiraiya-sama's apprentice?" When the boy nodded her blush deepened and she pulled out a kunai. The Chunin noted that it was made from Manbo-grade material when the light didn't reflect off the metal, but he didn't give it much thought. They were more expensive than regular equipment and almost never given to Junon or Chunin. However, she was acting very familiar with the clan leader so was probably an exception. I really liked the movie that just came out, and I think you're really strong. Can I maybe show you my moves and get some pointers?" The black fabric of Naruto's mask shifted as he smiled beneath it. "Of course, take me to the practice area. I love training." The girl grabbed his wrist and was about to take off, but Jiraiya interrupted before they got too far. "Remember what we talked about last night Naruto?" The Chunin's eye narrowed in suspicion, but Arashi caught it. The renowned author immediately put on a perverted grin and gave his godson 2 thumbs up. "Lots of children my boy, lots of children." Sasami immediately dropped his wrist and Naruto face faulted before he sprung up and angrily waved a fist at the lecher. "Damn it Hirusenin. Why'd you have to make it awkward like that?" The orangeette started scurrying away and the blonde stormed behind her. He also noticed the Fuima's face twist in suspicion and knew when his sensei was being serious. The shinobi decided to keep his guard up and eye roving. As the two walked away the lavender-haired man coughed into his hand. "That was rather inappropriate Jiraiya-sama. They're both too young to think about that sort of thing. Old enough to get it up, old enough to put it in. That's what I always say." The shinobi punctuated his sentence with 2 thumbs up and Arashi decided to forget the last minute of the conversation happened. "Right, well like my cousin said, Kotohime went to Northgate because it was her shift. Although some people in the base are not from our clan, we are the majority and hold positions of power there. We are stealing from Orochimaru to rebuild our village. He promised to raise us to glory, but we've been left to rot and wither instead. For now the Fuima will continue to play along, but our plan is to break away at the first opportunity." The sage gave a non-committal grunt. "Alright, but I still want to talk to Kotohime because she knows what I want to know. So if I could get directions, I'll be off and hopefully back before tomorrow morning. You won't mind watching Naruto?" The Fuuma nodded. "That shouldn't be a problem, he seems like a cheerful boy." He then turned and pointed to the southeast. Despite its name, the base lies in that direction. After 20 miles there's a large spire of rock, you literally can't miss it. The entrance to the basin on the north side and will open after tapping the exact center 3 times. Jiraiya nodded and set off. He wanted to leave a cage bunshine behind, but the Sennin felt eyes watching from everywhere and was betting they would follow him for quite a while. He had faith in his apprentice though. The boy was a crafty devil and a real bastard when he wanted to be. The Fuuma would have their hands full if they tried anything, or possibly cut off by that nasty blade. "Thanks again, I'll be back as soon as possible." Arashi gave a cheery wave as the man started running towards the base, but his smile turned sinister when he disappeared. "No rush, take your time." Naruto walked back through town with Sesame as his sharp eye roved around. Obviously Jiraiya knew something he didn't, but the boy hoped his teacher was wrong. The girl by his side was nothing but nice and he had fun all day, yet something definitely wasn't right. The town didn't look like the damage happened recently in a storm or attack, instead the buildings appeared to have simply decayed over time. Not performing basic maintenance indicated the clan's funds weren't exactly solid, but Sesame wasn't the only one with carbon steel equipment despite the hefty cost. The lumber was also expensive. Naruto had practiced sealing long enough to notice they were using chakra-treated wood. It had more resistance to attacks and decay than regular lumber and was specially made for sealing. The cost was ridiculously high for just one cord, but all the repairs were being done with it. He knew Orochimaru was active in the country, so the clan obviously had some type of connection to him, good or bad, but the Chunin hadn't heard one whisper about the mysterious shinobi either way. He was broken from his thoughts when Sesame wrapped her arms around his right one and nestled her head into his shoulder. Naruto knew he was leaving soon, but tried not to think about it because the girl had an undeniable charm about her. The kunoichi was incredibly positive and was constantly laughing or smiling. Not to mention she was just as determined as the blonde and worked on something until it was up to her standards. The best part was that Sesame wanted to hear more about his actual missions than the movies she'd already seen. After getting a picture, and asking a couple questions, that were more about the fights and ice jutsu than gossip, the Genin didn't even mention it. The fact she was cute was certainly A+ too. The orange-haired teen eventually let go of his arm as they walked into the Fuuma's banquet hall for a communal dinner. The room was spacious enough to fit the clan twice over, with a massive table in the center of the room that was 10 feet wide and approaching 50 feet long with benches on every side for seating. They chose 2 open spaces on the bench near the entrance and got comfortable. Arashi was at the opposite end and on his left sat a hunchback. Shaggy brown hair came down to the man's neck and buck teeth jutted from his upper lip, making for an ugly picture. The rest of the Fuuma's disfigured body was completely covered by a brown cloak. 2 other shinobi sat on the clan head's right. The man on the outside had on a green vest with no shirt underneath and towered over the other 3. He was bald with thick brown eyebrows and a scar over his right eye that forced it closed. Between him and the lavender-haired ninja was another man. He had thick black hair and had bushy eyebrows as well. He was wearing a sleeveless brown shirt and impatiently drummed on the table. After Arashi stood up to address everyone, Sesame leaned in and whispered to Naruto as a woman placed cups in front of everyone. "The one on his left is Kagero. She's actually a woman and that's a disguise for her technique. The black-haired man directly on his right is Kamakiri. He's pretty fast and is the only one in the clan that can challenge my cousin at shogi. The big guy on the outside is Jigumo and he can do crazy things with spiders. They're the 4 strongest Fuuma right now, but I'm going to be better than all of them someday." The blonde reached over and squeezed her hand in a show of support and tuned in after hearing his name. "He is Jiraiya-sama's apprentice and an honored guest tonight, so please make him feel welcome." The clan members gave a polite applause as the Chunin waved and smiled sheepishly. Once it died down, the green-eyed man raised his glass and continued, "Now I would like to offer a toast to the bright future of the Fuuma and our young movie star, Kanpai." Naruto blushed and raised his glass, but after taking a sip he almost spit it out. Apparently Jiraiya was right. The boy had been hit by enough of Sakura's poisons and tasted enough of her cooking to tell the difference when something just wasn't right or had been tampered with. He made a swallowing motion when it became apparent everyone's eyes were on him before taking a bite of some food and spitting everything into a napkin while pretending to wipe his face. Nobody was paying any attention to the blonde after the first bite, so he hoped it was a slow-acting one. The Chunin pretended to get a little drowsy and started to eat the delicious fish, which thankfully wasn't drugged. He randomly dropped bits of food and acted disoriented while periodically sipping the drink. but he always made sure to spit it into his napkin at the first opportunity. Once it was halfway gone, nearly everybody started glancing at the teen before looking away. Naruto started to sway dramatically before pretending to black out. He fell off the bench and heard heavy footsteps stomping across the wooden floor before stopping next to him. The boy thought he was going to get picked up. He wasn't expecting a boot to descend onto his cheek and really knock him unconscious. Jigumo spit on the teen before kicking him in the ribs for good measure. "Little punk, did you really think we wouldn't know? That was supposed to knock you out first sip." He picked up the limp Konoha and turned to Arashi. "I don't see why we had to go through all of this trouble. He's just one kid." The clan leader's smile turned vicious. "You saw the movie. This kid, as you call him, is literally an army by himself. I didn't want to risk anything." The man turned to his cousin and she suppressed the guilt churning in her stomach. "Great work, Sesame." He didn't expect a thing until tasting the poison. Who thought a brat would be able to recognize something like that? The girl didn't answer. Instead, she stared at her food and started mechanically eating while the boy was carried towards the doors. Arashi smiled and dug into his plate with gusto. "I told you, everyone, Orochimaru-sama has truly brought about the rise of the Fuma. He gave us the supplies to rebuild our town, helped ferret out a spy, and now we will usurp the treacherous Amakusa as Ta no Kuni's premier clan. All we have to do is deliver that prize to our master." A lower-ranked clan member tried to grab the spectacular blade off the shinobi's back, but a flash of red chakra burst from the sheath and overtook his hand before eating away at the flesh. He let out a pitiful wail of agony until the handles of large, scissor-like blades rotated around his neck before the shears snipped closed and decapitated him. The energy faded away as Kamakiri raised his arm as the weapon circled back to him on the rope. He frowned at the crimson trail flowing down the blade and dispelled the peculiar weapon before it dripped blood into his food. "What a fool. Nobody else try to grab the saber unless you want to end up like him. Just bind the Konoha in so he can't use it." Sasami lost her appetite and pushed her plate away in disgust, but the rest of the clan was too busy stuffing their gullets and celebrating to notice. That's it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and follow me on my other social media accounts. Anime God here, and I'm signing off.